So I had a video chat with a student yesterday, and I said to her that I really miss all of the students, and that is the truth. This whole distance learning thing is just not the same. We will, of course, make the best of it, but I really wish we could go into the classroom. I wish we could have morning meeting. I wish we could go to the lunchroom together and talk and joke and laugh. I wish that we could, go to recess together and play. All the little interactions that we share together during the day that are fun and that make the school day exciting, and we're missing out on that. With that said, we'll just keep going and we'll just keep doing our best. And all of my students, all fourth graders, to know that I sincerely miss you, and that I look forward to the day that we all can see each other again under normal circumstances. So let's jump right in for today's topic. Today we will be discussing rounding decimals. Now, just like whole numbers, we can also round decimals. Now, students in my class might recall using the rounding roller coaster to round whole numbers. And no, probably not like the fun type of roller coaster that you're thinking of. Okay. I'm more than aware of the fact that my video production skills are not where I want them to be. Yet. We used the rounding roller coaster to round whole numbers. For example, 532 rounded to the nearest hundred. 0, 100, 200, 300, 400, all the way to infinity. Those are hundreds. So when I say rounding to the nearest hundred, if I put 532 somewhere in here, we know 532 would fit between 500 and 600. We are going to decide to which hundred 532 is closest. Between 500 and 600 is 550. If we have the number 532, these guys want to ride the rounding roller coaster, okay? They start here. Now the question is 532 before or after 550? Clearly it's before 550. Which means it's still ascending on our rounding roller coaster. It's still going up. If we round, we'd round back to 500. 532 rounded to the nearest hundred is 500. Rounding decimals is extremely similar to rounding whole numbers. Now we could round whole numbers to the nearest 1,000, to the nearest 100, to the nearest 10 or 1, just as we can round decimals to the nearest 10th, 100th, 1,000th, and so on. So let's take a look here at a rounding roller coaster setup, and we want to round 44 hundredths to the nearest tenth. The first thing to consider is when looking at 44 hundredths on our unit square grid, we have 100 equal parts. Just as we did in early decimal lessons when we had 10 equal parts in our unit square grid, we still have 4 tenths and 4 hundredths, which combine to make 44 hundredths. So the question is, what 2/10 amounts does 44 hundredths lie between? So if you consider the tenth amounts, we have 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, and so on to infinity. Between which 2/10 amounts would 44 hundredths fit? Well, clearly it's more than 1/10, it's more than 2/10, it's more than 3/10, it's more than 4/10, but it's not more than 5/10. So we know 44 hundredths lies somewhere between 4/10 and 5/10. And you can see that very clearly on our unit square grid here. We have 4/10 colored in, but not quite all the way to 5/10. So the question is it closer to go back to 4/10, or is it closer to color in all the way to 5/10? Well, to consider that further, we know that 45 hundredths is exactly the same distance between 4/10 and 5/10, because 5 hundredths is half of 1/10. Meaning if I take away 5 hundredths in this situation, I'm at 4/10. Or if I add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hundredths, I've reached 5/10. So in that way, 45 hundredths is right in the middle between 4/10 and 5/10. But we didn't have 45 hundredths. We had 44 hundredths. So 44 hundredths, you can see, is closer to 4/10. In that case, we know it's between 4/10 and 5/10. 45 hundredths is perfectly in the middle between 4/10 and 5/10. So when considering 44 hundredths on the rounding roller coaster, we know 44 hundredths comes before 45 hundredths. Thus, if we round 44 hundredths to the nearest tenth, we round back to 4/10. What amount would this decimal have to be to round up to 5/10? Now, just as we showed before, having 45 hundredths is right in the middle between 4/10 and 5/10. And if you're right in the middle, you always round up. So 45 hundredths, 46 hundredths, 47 hundredths, 48 hundredths, and 49 hundredths, all of those amounts are closer to 5/10 than they are to 4/10. And they would round up to the nearest tenth, 5/10 in that case. To complete your independent work, you will need to round decimals to the nearest tenth. To start with this first example, you must round 12 hundredths to the nearest tenth. Each example will have a unit square grid at the top of the page that will show the amount that you are rounding. So here you can see that there are 12 hundredths shaded in. This first problem tells us the two closest tenths. In that case, it is 1/10 and 2/10. Now what that means is that 12/10 falls between 1/10 and 2/10. It's somewhere in between. It's more than 1/10, but it's less than 2/10. Your job is to circle the tenth amount to which 12 hundredths is closest. By doing this, you are rounding to the nearest tenth. On the next line, it says how far away from 12 hundredths? This corresponds to this amount above it. 1/10 is 2 hundredths away from 12 hundredths. 2/10 is 8 hundredths away from 12 hundredths. As you can see that here, if I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hundredths more, I'll reach 2/10. If I count back 1, 2 hundredths, I will have reached 1/10. So this amount corresponds to this amount, and this amount corresponds to this amount. Once you know which tenth amount to which 12 hundredths is closest, circle it. This circle can be moved around the page. And in this case, since we can see that 1/10 is only 2 hundredths away from 12 hundredths, and that 2/10 is 8 hundredths away, 2 hundredths being less than 8 hundredths, meaning it's closer, we will circle 1/10, meaning we have rounded down to 1/10. 12 hundredths rounded to the nearest tenth is 1/10. The next problem tells us the closest tenths to 34 hundredths. As you can see, 34 hundredths here. If I take away these 4 hundredths, I've gone to 3/10. Or if I fill in the rest of those hundredths, I've reached 4/10. How far away is 34 hundredths from 3/10? Well, it's 4 hundredths away. As you can see, if I erase 1, 2, 3, 4 hundredths, I will have reached 3/10. It's 4 hundredths away. Or if I add 6 hundredths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hundredths, I'll reach 4/10. As you can see, 4 hundredths is less than 6 hundredths, meaning that 34 hundredths is closer to 3/10 than it is to 4/10. So I'll circle it. In this case, we are again rounding down to 3/10. 34 hundredths rounded to the nearest tenth is 3/10. In the following slides, you will have to type what the nearest tenths are and how far away they are to the decimal amount that you are rounding. After that, you will circle the tenth amount to which your decimal is closest. Do your best.